أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد المصطفى النبي الأمي طيب طاهر بصلاة تنهل بلا قدرة بالكرم أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم بأنواع كمالاتك في جميع تجلياتك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد أول الأنوار الفائضة من بحور عظمة الذات المتحقق في عالمي البطون والظهور بمعنى الأسماء والصفات، فهو أول حامد ومتعبد بأنواع العبادات والقربات، والممد في عالم الأرواح والأشباح لجميع الموجودات، وعلى آله وأصحابه صلاة تكشف لنا النقاب عن وجه الكريم في المراء واليقظات، وتعرفنا بك وبه في جميع المرات والحضرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاهه في الحركات والسكنات واللحظات والخطرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاهه في الحركات والسكنات واللحظات والخطرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاهه في الحركات والسكنات واللحظات والخطرات. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، سلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Okay. Today we're going to be reading Plotinus's On Beauty. As Armstrong notes in his introduction, this treatise is the first in Porphyry's chronological order, because Porphyry has his own chronological order, because he's the editor. He was charged with editing Plotinus's corpus. But he says it does not necessarily mean that it was the first which Plotinus wrote. It has been perhaps the best known and most read treatise in the Enneads, both in ancient and modern times. It should be read with the later treatise on the intelligible beauty. Has everyone got their On Beauty? You got your On Beauty? Everyone? All got it? So it should be read with the later treatise on the intelligible beauty, which is 5.8. Now, 5.8 is something that you could read on your own after reading this one. It is, one of the most key treatises, but it's a bit more extensive than this one, so I don't think we'd have time to go through it, but it is an extension of this 1.6. The object of the treatise on beauty, as becomes clear in the later chapters, is not to provide its readers with an aesthetic philosophy, but to exhort them to ascend through all the visible and invisible beauties of derived reality to the source of all beauty, the good. On that journey of the mind to God, which was always Plotinus's main concern. Right. And then he's got a little synopsis, but I think we'll just go on with the text, inshallah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. To kalon esti men en hupse pleiston, esti den, aquais kata telogon sun theses. Esti decai en musicae kai hapase kai garmele kai oruthmoi, aisi kaloi esti decai priusi prosto anno apotes aistheos, kai epidediamata kala kai praxes kai hexes kai epistemai tekai toton ereton kalos. Aida ti kai pro tautun autu dexe. Is Yasin Caratella around Cambridge still, or does he? He's back where? Leicester. Oh, in Leicester. So he'd have to attend online anyway. Tiun de to pepoekos kai ta somata kala fantasestai kai ten akone apenuen ape neuen tais phones os kalai. Kai hosa effexes psuches egetai, pos pote pantacala, kai ara ge heni kai to auto kalo tapanta, he alo men en somati to kalos, alo de en alo. Kai tina pote tauta he tautu, tamen gar o gar auton ton opakeme, non kala hoian tasomata ala methexe tade kale auta hosper arates hefusis. And I hope in the coming weeks and months I'll have more people to call on to read. I know Sidi Niaz can read, and Sidi, there's of course dear John Rapoulis, who is Greek as well. So mata men gartau ta hote men kala, hote deu kala fainatai, hos alu ontos tu somata enai alu de tu kala. Ti un esti tauto to paron toi somasi, proton gar peritautu skepteon, ti un estin hocinai tas opses ton theomenon. Get off your phone. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. Kai epistrefe pros auto kai helke kai. I don't want you to miss a moment. That's definitely a lot. Kai eufranestai te thea poie. Anyway, I think that will do for now. So who's going to read? Sheikh Yusuf would like to read live from Cambridge.
On beauty. Beauty is mostly in sight, but it is to be found too in things we hear, in combinations of words, and also in music, and in all music, not only in songs, for tunes and rhythms are certainly beautiful. And for those who are advancing upwards from sense perception, ways of life and actions in characters and intellectual activities are beautiful. And there is the beauty of virtue. If there is any beauty prior to these, it itself will reveal it. Very well then. What is it that which makes us imagine that bodies are beautiful and attracts our hearing to sounds because of their beauty? And how are all the things which depend on soul beautiful? Are they all made beautiful by one and the same beauty, or is there one beautifulness in bodies and a different one in other things? And what are they, or what is it? Some things, bodies for instance, are not beautiful from the nature of the objects themselves, but by participation. Others are beauties themselves, like the nature of virtue. The same bodies appear sometimes beautiful, sometimes not beautiful, so that their being bodies is one thing, and their being beautiful another. What is this principle, then, which is present in bodies? We ought to consider this first. What is it that attracts the gaze of those who look at something, and turns and draws them to it and makes them enjoy the sight? If we find this, perhaps we can use it as a stepping stone.
Very nice. Thank you very much. We are continuing on with our exploration of these key treatises from the Aeneid, having covered on dialectic last time. What we find is that they form an extraordinarily coherent, there's an extraordinary continuity that obtains between them. And that's really very much in contradistinction to the highly compartmentalized way of dealing with various philosophical topics in a lot of modern philosophy. And that's because there is underlying all of these mabahith and not only a single mode of investigation, that might be not that difficult to find in modernity, but there is understood an ontology and a hierarchically ordered understanding of the degrees of being into which everything fits and which encompasses everything. And that hierarchical ordering, that idea of an intrinsic hierarchy of being, allows you to place every single possible philosophical question really in its proper place. And so there's a lot of these masail intertwine with one another. And so the hierarchy of the moral hierarchy is the aesthetic hierarchy. It is the metaphysical hierarchy. And this accords also very well with the idea of the Platonic transcendentals, which we'll get into in a bit. So for those who are advancing upwards from sense perception, he says, ways of life and actions and characters and intellectual activities are beautiful. And there is the beauty of virtue. And he says, some things, bodies, for instance, are not beautiful from the nature of the objects themselves, but by participation. Others are beauties themselves, like the nature of virtue. Now, Paul Caligas, in this very helpful commentary on the whole Ennead, this is only volume 1, which is all that's out so far. It goes up to about 3.9. He has something very helpful to say here. Yeah, beautifulness is for kalos, is for sensible objects something exogenous and acquired in which they participate. For the virtues of the soul, on the other hand, it is something inherent and inseparable from their substance, right? For the virtues of the soul, on the other hand, it is something inherent, beautifulness, as he says here. It is something inherent and inseparable from their substance, right? So the reasoning behind this has already been exposed in chapter 6 of treatise 1-2, which we haven't looked at, but it's just before this one, or a few before this. The substance of the virtues resides in the intelligibles, that is, as will become clear below, in the beautiful kalon itself. Right. And he just has a note about the word euphranesthai, the correlation of beauty with gladness, euphrosune, or pleasure, is endorsed repeatedly in the works of Plato. So beauty is not something which belongs intrinsically or fundamentally to the corporeal, and yet it's something that we witness in the corporeal, in the beauties of nature and so on. And so how is it that this intelligible quality, which is of the intelligible world, becomes affixed or becomes manifest through the corporeal world? So this is something that he wants to discuss. And the general answer, just to set the stage for it, is that it is of the nature of the intelligible realm itself. So the intelligible realm in itself is beautiful. It is good. It is true. It is unitary, right? And so you have the Platonic transcendentals. What are the Platonic transcendentals, Sheikh? Do you know?
No.
The good, they're known as the Platonic transcendentals sometimes, the good, the beautiful, and the true. What is it what is a transcendental property? Transcendental property is a property which everything which is convertible, everything which is beautiful is true, everything which is true is good, everything which is good is beautiful, everything which is beautiful is true, everything is, they're convertible. So everything in the realm of being possesses all of those properties, right? In the realm of true being, which is the world of forms. In the world of becoming, which we are presently enjoying, these properties are not fundamentally rooted. They're foreigners to this domain in themselves. We only receive the kind of traces, but their primary being is nowhere to be found here. And he will expand upon that as well as we go. So then, what is it that attracts the gaze of those who look at something in turn and turns and draws them to it and makes them enjoy the sight? That again is the word we just saw, that of causing gladness, euphranesthai. So if we find this, perhaps we can use it as a stepping stone, and that's a reference to the Symposium 211 C3, and get a sight of the rest. Nearly everyone says that it is good proportion of the parts to each other and to the whole with the addition of good color, which produces visible beauty. And that with the objects of sight and generally with everything else, being beautiful is being well proportioned and measured. Right. Legatai mende parapanton hos epain osumetria ton meron pros alela kai pros toholon totetes echroias prosthethen to prosten hopsin kalos poie kai estin autois kai holos tois alois passi to kalois enai tu sometrois kai memetremenois uparchein. Right. So nearly everyone says that it is good proportion of the parts to each other and to the whole with the addition of good color, which produces visible beauty. So this is very much generally accepted, that beauty means a good proportion of the parts to each other and to the whole. And this is something that Plotinus, as you would probably imagine, considers to be a reductive account, which fails to capture the fullness of the meaning of beauty. So Caligas says Plotinus is correct in pointing out the virtually unanimous acceptance in antiquity of the correlation of beauty with good proportion, symmetria. So you can see how that is familiar to us. Plato articulates this view comprehensively in the Timaeus, and so on. But you can have a look at that note if you'd like. So it will be the whole which is beautiful, and the parts will not have the property of beauty by themselves, but will contribute to the beauty of the whole. But if the whole is beautiful, the parts must be beautiful too. A beautiful whole can certainly not be composed of ugly parts. All the parts must have beauty. For these people too, beautiful colors, those who hold that view of proportion, beautiful colors in the light of the sun as well, since they are simple and do not derive their beautifulness from good proportion, will be excluded from beauty. So this is part of his rod here. For these people, beautiful colors and the light of the sun as well, since they are simple and do not derive their beautifulness from good proportion, will be excluded from beauty. So he's saying that if you're positing proportion and symmetry and the proportion of the various parts to one another as your criterion for beauty, then that presupposes and implies a multiplicity. There is a multiplicity of parts, and so that poses problems for where there's something which is simple in the sense of non-composite. So, and how do you think gold manages to be beautiful? And how do you think, and what makes lightning in the night and stars beautiful to see? And in sounds, in the same way, the simple will be banished. though often in a composition which is beautiful as a whole, each separate sound is beautiful. So you have a single sound, a resounding note of A, for example, echoing out. And when, though the same good proportion is there all the time, the same face, human face, sometimes appears beautiful and sometimes does not. Surely what we must say that being beautiful is something else over and above called good proportion. And good proportion is beautiful because of something else. Now, it's also interesting that Kaligas notes that Plotinus is not denying that beauty is related to good proportion and symmetry, but rather that there's no identification of its nature. He says it must be emphasized that Plotinus does not object as such to the correlation of beauty with good proportion. The point that concerns him is that in his view, those who consider that the latter produces the former have their facts the wrong way round. As will be further made clear below, being well proportioned, according to Plotinus, is a consequence and manifestation of the presence of beauty, not its cause. Beauty must be said to be what illuminates good proportions rather than the good proportions themselves. That's from 6-7, actually, 22, 24 to 26. And when, though the same good proportion is there all the time, the same face sometimes appears beautiful and sometimes does not, surely we must say that being beautiful is something else over and above good proportion, and good proportion is beautiful because of something else. But if when these people pass on to ways of life, well, gold and someone asked about gold and the sun were commonly used examples for the symbolic of the intelligible realm in Platonism. And that's probably because, well, certainly in the case of the sun, and perhaps gold is following on from that because of the analogy between the sun and gold. The sun is the ultimate symbol of the good, causing, giving being and knowability to the objects of knowledge, as it says in the Republic. But if when these people pass on to what the people holding this view, but if when these people pass on to ways of life and beautiful expressions of thought, they allege good proportion as the cause of beauty in these too, what can be meant by good proportion in beautiful ways of life or laws or studies or branches of knowledge? How can speculations be well proportioned in relation to each other? If it is because they agree, there can be concord and agreement between bad ideas. What does that sound like, anyone? If it is because they agree, there can be concord and agreement between bad ideas. That ring any bells for a theory of truth? The coherence, yeah, coherence theory of truth. That is exactly the concord and agreement between bad ideas. The statement that righteousness is a fine sort of silliness agrees with and is in tune with the saying that morality is stupidity. The two fit perfectly. And those are actually references to the Republic. Again, every sort of virtue is a beauty of the soul, a truer beauty than those mentioned before. But how is virtue, well proportioned? Not like magnitudes or a number. We grant that the soul has several parts, but what is the formula for the composition or mixture in the soul of parts or speculations? And what, on this theory, will the beauty of the intellect alone by itself be? Okay. And then he's going to go and say, so let us go back to the beginning and state what the primary beauty embodies really is. John, would you like to read too? Yeah, Yahya. خذ الكتاب بقوة.
No, City. It's
No?
it's been a while since I've read Greek, so please give me some time to warm up my reading muscles.
Oh, Okay, I'll give you half an hour, Sidi. Now, أهلا وسهلا. I don't quite believe you, but that's fine. You may have other reasons. I'm not going to pray. All right, so here we go. Palin un analabontes legomen tidata estito entois somasi kalon proton. Esti men garti kai bole te prote aestheton genomenon kai he psuche. What's he psuche, everyone? He psuche. Psuche. The soul. The soul. Very good. Kai he psuche hosper sunesa lege kai epignusa apodechetai kai hoion sunarmotet what is it? Sunarmotetai. Prosteto aischron prosbalusa aniletai kai arnetai kai ananeoi ap autu symfonusa kai alot riumene famende hosten fusin usa hoper esti kai prostes kretonos entois usin usias. Higher kind of reality. Tois usin usias hoti an ide sungenes he ichnos tu sungenus chaire te kai diep toetai kai anafere pros iauten kai anamimnes getai iautes kai ton iautes. All right, that will do. So could we read from number 2, please, Maulana Niaz, 162? So let us go back to the beginning.
Yes. No.
Thank you.
So here, so let us go back to the beginning. This part
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
So let us go back to the beginning and state what the primary beauty in bodies really is. It is something which we become aware of even at the first glance. The soul recognizes and welcomes it, and as it were, adapts itself to it. But when it encounters and turns away from it and is out of tune from it. Our explanation of this is that the soul, since it is by nature what it is and is related to the higher kind of reality in the realm of being, when it sees something akin to it or a trace of its kindred reality, is delighted and thrilled and returns to itself and remembers itself and its own possessions.
Okay, thank you.
Likeness, that's it, huh?
Yeah, let's just stop there for now. So I just want to do, we'll go on very shortly, but just to say that the soul is understood, and this goes right back to Socrates' very famous speeches in the Apology and the Phaedo, which are really very, if you want to have those are the places to start, and conveniently at the end of they're at the beginning of basically every collected works of Plato, but they're really the places to start just to get into Plato's writings. The Apology, Socrates' Apology, which is his kind of soliloquy when he's being condemned to death, and the Phaedo, which is his whole account of the immortality of the soul. And there's much more there, but there, and also in the Phaedrus, and by implication in other places like the Meno, where the doctrine of recollection is mentioned, you have this understanding that the soul is kindred. It's of the same kind, or it has a strong likeness in kind to the realm of forms, and that's actually where the soul was before the creation of the world of becoming, before it became into the body, it was in the realm of forms, aware of the realm of forms, aware of this realm of intellect, this realm of the splendor of beauty, truth, and goodness. And this is why it can recognize these glimmers of that realm when it encounters them here. And it sees something which is, how does he say it?
Kindred reality.
Is that where he says? Oh yeah, kindred reality, yeah. Our explanation of this is that the soul senses by nature what it is and is related to the higher kind of reality and the realm of being. When it sees something akin to it or a trace of its kindred reality, is delighted and thrilled and returns to itself and remembers itself in its own possessions. So again, beauty is not this isolated property. The whole realm of being, which again, what is the realm of being? What's the realm of being? The realm of being is the realm of intellect and the forms. So the realm of capital B being, so there may be other usages of being which are less technical, but because it's just one of those, well, it's one of min al-mafahim awwaliya, so we're always using it all the time. It's min al-mafahim al-awwaliya, yeah. Being itself is only the realm of being, what you would call capital B being, and that's simply the realm of form. So the realm of becoming doesn't possess true being. It only possesses, it possesses traces of being because it is the instantiation of the forms, and only the forms in themselves. So we possess true being. So, but what I'm trying to get across is that the beautiful is one of the properties of the realm of true being, and it possesses, it's not in some sense isolated. So you've got the beautiful part of it over here, or I thought I'd closed WhatsApp, but apparently not. So you've got just the form of the beautiful, and that's what's beautiful. And then no, the world of the forms is a world of light and beauty and goodness and truth, all interfused with one another.
We say that, I mean, when we're talking of beauty, is it, or the Platonic transcendental in general, the interchangeable unity in and of itself, as opposed to being in and of itself, because it's a guarantor for, as we're saying, unity in this case.
Yeah, unity is epikenetes. So unity is beyond being or beyond substance, right? In this understanding, unity in itself, because unity itself is the one.
Does beauty not go back to that realm?
Beauty arises from the one, but it's not beyond being. It's in its proper domain is the realm of being, which is the realm of intellect, or the realm of the forms in this understanding. The one which alone you can, and I mean he deals with this particular masala. I can show you, and I can send you the references for this. It's a very good question, because it is what one would probably assume if one was thinking about this carefully enough. But it is beauty is not beyond being. It's seen as being a subordinate degree, and but because the one, although the one is the good, and all goodness which is identified with unity proceeds from the one, beauty is not as fundamental a term. It's not fundamental enough to actually describe the one.
Is that because I'm just trying to think, if we're understanding being as determinateness, which I believe is a superior way to understand, because if we include indeterminateness, and it loses its meaning, of course. And if we're understanding,
Could you just speak up a bit, because I'm worried that it's not going to come through yet.
if we're understanding beauty in this sense as being interchangeable with good at that level, and the good in that sense is the one, is it because the one being that guarantor for this duality of the known and the knower at the level of intellect? So you have that kind of level beyond it, and good is of that realm because it guarantees that unity and duality that we see. Is it because beauty has a kind of relationality to it that then makes it subordinate? Because at the level of the one, you can't have such a relation, whereas beauty is a relation of that unity to kind of one.
Knower and the known.
So is it that relationality that then makes it not at the level of the one beyond being, but at the level of being
I think that
itself?
would be a very important part of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
The only issue is then one could make a similar argument for the concept of good.
Not quite in the same way, because the good is the, I always liken it, I mean, anything from the revelation is by its nature infinitely superior and suffused with barakah, but I liken it in a way to a samad, right? And the samad, you know, there's a very nice translation of the samad, which is the samad, which is the eternally besought, the independent and eternally besought, right? And this is essentially the conception of the good here, and the good is identified with the one because it is the source of the determinateness of everything. As if you can see, being beautiful, although it's very fundamental, it's not quite as fundamental as that.
They're not entirely interchangeable.
No, but this is the superordinate good. It's not the same as the transcendental good. Yeah, this is the superordinate good, which is the one, because the one is not one of the Platonic transcendentals. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good point. But this is the superordinate good, and so yes, it's how everything realizes its own determinateness, and it's because also the one is what's the word? Dynamis tone pantone. So the one is virtually all things, or is the power to be all things, right? Dynamis tone pantone, right? So it is the power to be all. So all of the determinateness, although it's not determinate in the one qua the one in that non-compositeness possesses the power of that infinite plenitude for all of all of the determinateness, or for all the determinate beings, for all of the multiplicity.
That precisely because they must participate in principle of unity to have determinateness.
Well, it's that, and it's also the fact that it is that non-composite nature which is that ultimate power, right? And we are limited in power because we are composite and we are determinate. Whereas all of those qiyud go, and you have, you know, as much as I hate to use the word pure being, but we have, you know, you have the pure being, which is that infinity of plenitude of power, that infinite plenitude of power to be all things. But it isn't bil fi'l, that requires the unfolding of the subordinate realm.
So I think you mashallah answered. I was going to ask a follow-up question, but you answered it. But just for reflection's sake, in terms of, because I know you mentioned a very helpful comment.
He's very khatir to this one. I want everyone to see him. Look.
I think so. The idea that the one, the most primary principle of unity, it should not be considered as being unintelligible, but rather ineffability should not be understood as unintelligibility, but rather of kind of infinite intelligibility.
Exactly. That's and that's how dear Sheikh Dr. Karim Zakarallah al-Khair put it. And he's and I think that's very definitely. But yes, it's not ineffability is not the people who maybe don't understand philosophy have tend to make facile objections to negative theology and to Plotinus in particular, because he's so associated with apathetic thought, and they tend to say that, well, you're saying that nothing can be known about this being. But no, we're saying that this being is ineffable. His nature is ineffable, not that he's unintelligible, because ineffability is not the same thing as unintelligibility.
Yeah, because I think this idea of understanding being as determinateness and therefore intelligibility, and is then, if we're saying that the one is beyond being, it's understood as beyond intelligibility. But then what you've mentioned about being having the power to be all things means that it simultaneously is beyond being, but also has that infinite intelligibility, and so
Absolutely,
doesn't fall into this kind of Kantian trap.
Exactly. And and let's not forget, just from last time, that epikenetes ousias is often translated as beyond being, although that's actually quite a confusing way to translate, not really the best way to translate it, because it would probably be best, as Gerson says, to translate it as beyond substance.
And just for clarification's sake, in this model, being qua being is the intellect.
Yeah, being, which is the only real form of being, capital B being, is the realm of intellect, not our limited intellects, which are only participatory, but it's the realm of intellect. The realm of true being is the realm of intellect, which is the realm of substance as well, because Plotinus calls the corporeal substance that Aristotle talks about as merely legomene ousia. It's only so-called substance, whereas true substance is only that which pertains to the realm of true being, which is composed by the 5 megistogene. The 5 primary genera are what they're the kind of fabric out of which substance, real substance, the realm of intellect, is woven.
So being is the realm of forms. Would we say being is that intellect itself?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, knowing and being. Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah. So, all right, let's go on. Do you have any comments, Sheikh Amalena? Was it? Nothing? No, not at all. Ahlan wa sahlan. So, it's delighted and thrilled and returns to itself, remembers itself in its own possessions. What likeness then is there between beautiful things here and there? If there, I mean, yonder, the realm of forms. If there is a likeness, let us agree that they're alike, but how are both the things in that world and the things in this beautiful? We maintain that the things in this world are beautiful by participating in form. For every shapeless thing which is naturally capable of receiving shape and form is ugly and outside the divine formative power, kai exo theou logu, as long as it has no share in formative power and form. This is absolute ugliness, but a thing is also ugly when it is not completely dominated by shape and formative power, since its matter has not submitted to be completely shaped according to the form. The form then approaches and composes that which is to come into being from many parts into a single ordered whole. It brings it into a completed unity and makes it one by agreement of its parts, for since it is one itself, that which is shaped by it must also be one, as far as a thing can be, which is composed, it must also be one as far as a thing can be, which is composed of many parts. So beauty rests upon the material thing when it has been brought into unity and gives itself to parts and wholes alike. When it comes upon something that is one and composed of like parts, it gives the same gift to the whole, as sometimes art gives beauty to a whole house with its parts, and sometimes nature gives beauty to a single stone. So then the beautiful body comes into being by sharing in a formative power which comes from the divine forms. Genosce de auto he ep auto dunamis de tag mene. He suuden curioteron, eis crisin to iautes, hotan kai he ale, sune pic rine psuche, tachade kai aute lege sonar matusa to par aute ede kakeno prosten krisin chromene hosper canoni tu eotheos. The power ordained for the purpose recognizes this, and there is nothing more effective for judging its own subject matter when the rest of the soul judges along with it, or perhaps the rest of the soul too pronounces the judgment by fitting the beautiful body to the form in itself and using this for judgment, for judging beauty as we use a ruler for judging straightness. But how does the bodily agree with that which is before body? How does the architect declare the house outside beautiful by fitting it to the form of house within him? The reason is that the house outside, apart from the stones, is the inner form divided by the external mass of matter without parts but appearing in many parts. When sense perception then sees the form in bodies binding and mastering the nature opposed to it, which is shapeless, and shape riding gloriously upon other shapes, it gathers into one that which appears dispersed and brings it back and takes it in, now without parts, the soul's interior, and presents it to that which is within as something in tune with it and fitting it and dear to it. Just as when a good man sees a trace of virtue in the young, which is in tune with his own inner truth, the sight delights him. Right. So there's something in here that was quite interesting. So what happens, though, Caligas asks, if the model the architect chooses as his starting point, as in the form that he has in his soul before he starts building? What happens if the model the architect chooses as his starting point is itself ugly? Plotinus does not here provide any answer to this question, which in our days has become a crucial one. We can surmise, however, that he would respond by clarifying that in such a case, it would not be the imperfect subjugation of matter by form that would be directly productive of ugliness, but rather the evil, kakia, within the soul of the architect himself, that would have caused intelligible imprints within it to become malformed. I think Sidi Ahmed and Sidi Karim would love that. It's just the evil residing in the modern person which makes them create that ugliness. So that was one of the things I wanted to read. The other one. Intelligible beauty. This is on 1.53 to 54. Intelligible beauty is nothing other than the intellect itself as object of contemplation. Yet intellect as an indivisible and transcendent entity does not in its aloneness, monoumenos, allow for any kind of commingling among its parts. The universal proportion in the intelligible, entoi noetoi peripanta symmetria, arises not from the synthesis of heterogeneous components, but from the ontological inter-articulation of the forms into a perfectly unitary whole. And that ontological inter-articulation of the forms, something you'll find spoken about in the Sophist of Plato when he introduces the Megistogene, and then again in Plotinus when he talks about the Megistogene in 6:1-3. So, where are we up to? I think we'll go up to here for today. Bismillah ta'ala. Yes, Sheikh. So I apologize if I just haven't understood this well enough, but with the Platonic transcendentals, how do you understand each of those things in a sort of positive sense when we're intentionally using those words? So
Yeah.
good, truth, beauty. I've heard of good as like a kind of integration, but how about the other ones? And because obviously you can't define them, but just in a positive sense, what do you mean when we're talking about these realities?
So what do you think? Why do I have to do all the hard work? What do you think?
I don't know, to be honest. It's
Well, what do you think? I mean, if we were to say that there's a difference in i'tibar between them,
yeah,
what would you say is the difference in i'tibar? They're convertible,
yeah.
but there's a difference of i'tibar. What would you say? You got the good, you got the one, and you got the beautiful. Anyone?
It's the difference.
Could you shout, please? You've got a very humble Sufi voice. But you need to shout.
I mean, in that subordinate level of being, would it be the relation of reality to it's different relations of reality itself to different things?
I think so. I think there'd be an i'tibari difference. If these are all fundamentally the same thing, there must be in some way an i'tibari. Now, as we know, i'tibari doesn't mean not real. Doesn't mean not real, but it just means i'tibari. So, I mean, Plato will say suggestive things like beauty is the splendor of the truth, for example. But truth, goodness, beauty, the good of a thing is, to some degree, it's true with what Aristotle says, and he takes it from a Platonic source. But the problem is that he stops there. He doesn't realize that there's a universal good beyond that. But the good of each thing is, in a way, the actualization of its own nature, right? And so the good is, in some way, pure and complete actualization, right? It is pure and complete actualization. But the good of a thing is also its unity, because I mean, not because, but it happens, it is also a very important principle that the aesthetic and the moral and the ontological hierarchies are the same hierarchy. They're all rising in terms of principles of unity. And so the good of a thing is it's also becoming characterized by its specific unity, the form which makes it most itself, right? And then the beauty is, let's say, the appearance of that good, the appearance which leads to that good being sought after. So it's the appearance of that good that gives rise to our seeking after that, to realize that good, right? Mathalan, but yes, I mean, absolutely, as you mentioned, Maulana, the point is that these are not definable, they're not reducible, because they are such primary. And if you move beyond the rather dry Umur Amma, and I'm very fond of the Umur Amma, because they're an extraordinary gateway to real metaphysics, and there's a lot of great interest there in talking about the Umur Amma. But I mean, as we know, the source of the medieval doctrine of the Transcendentals is the same source in Avicenna 1.5 of the Metaphysics as the doctrine of the Umur Amma. So he says there, ثم مفاهيم أولية لا تحتاج إلى أن تجلب بأشياء أعرف منها, right? So do you have anything to say, Sheikh?
No, I think, I mean, so does that require a sort of
What does?
that doctrine? And if you're saying that there's nothing beyond it.
Well, exactly. If you've got this flat vision, it's just, you know, the order of things as they happen to appear. And yes, they're conceptual, but it's not so much that it necessarily demands a salat al-wujud, because the real basis of the salat al-wujud doctrine is the doctrine that the essence and existence are, that God only has pure existence. He doesn't have an essence, which is Avicenna's view, and then something that Aquinas takes on and the Thomists become tremendously proud of. But that's the real, but then in the order of intellection, yes, you have a salat al-wujud as, and yes, I mean, insofar as those concepts, it depends on the ontological interpretation of the Mu'amma, but insofar as the mafahim awaliya are irreducible concepts, which are the building blocks of our knowledge, then yes, that intuition of being is going to be the most primary. But you know, the reason I'm hesitating is because they're hesitating at this point. You know, what is it? Like, what domain precisely are we talking about when we're talking about pure being? Is it in the realm of the conceptual? But then we say, no, it has ontological import. And there's this mysterious thing called pure being, which we're somehow having an intuition of when we have the intuition of the concept. The point is, it gets very, yeah, go on.
No, I mean, because if they're saying that there's that being is most primary, how are they understanding what does being mean to that? If would they understand it as determinateness?
No, they don't understand it as determinateness.
So how, do they just extend that concept to this realm of pure indeterminateness? What is their positive meaning of being then?
They can't define it. I mean, their whole thing is it's a self-evident concept, because any attempt to define it will already presuppose it. That's true. That's true of being in the very broad conceptual sense that they're talking about, which of course does include the indeterminate. So, but then the problem is it's impossible to really consistently posit that this is primary in any way or a real property. It's just an body property. The real substantive meaning of being, not in the sense that they mean it, which encompasses non-being, but in the sense that, I mean, this is literally how it's construed in Platonism, is that it's the determinate, and in terms of it, the source of its being, the source of its determinateness. So, so as in, you see a subordinate level of being, and you notice the determinateness, but the al-ta'ayyun yaqtadi sabq la ta'ayyun alayhi. So every ta'ayyun presupposes that there's a la ta'ayyun which has made that ta'ayyun possible. Why? Because it's the ta'ayyun of that particular property rather than another one, right? So it's seeing the determinate in terms of its source. Not that you know what the source is, but I'm just saying in terms of it's a ta'ayyun emerging from a la ta'ayyun, not a la ta'ayyun mutlaqan, but a la ta'ayyun in terms of that particular domain of being. Because everything which is muta'ayyun, let's say, you know, this person, just to pick you out at random, is there's no tarjih bidun marajjih, so there must have been a very subtle thought process that went on. But anyway, this person is muta'ayyin, right? And that yaqtadi sabq la ta'ayyun alayhi, that is, there has to be the not muta'ayyin human being in general, right? I'm just speaking loosely for fun, but the human being in general that he's a determinate instantiation of, right? But he's only fully intelligible in terms of his being, not only in terms of the determinateness, but also, like, for want of a better word, I don't like using the word universal very much, you know, but he's only intelligible really as a determination of the universal. But the determinateness itself is not the universal, but it's the real present. There is a real presence of the universal, as Findlay likes to put it. It's the determinateness in terms of its source, right? So anyway,
let's go on to the Metacritique of Kant, the possibility of metaphysics. Bismillah. But thank you, Sidi, that's very helpful. Now, we went to page, got up to, yeah. So we were saying last time, when the structure of human cognition is examined, it becomes evident that it is unable to reach the lofty goals that it cannot help but set itself. So this is at the end of page 36. I had a whole stack of the book to give to people who don't have it. I think you all have it. Does anyone not have it? My Kant book. You don't have it? You don't?
I have it at home, but I have a PDF that you sent us.
Do you have it? You got this book?
From you guys?
Got a PDF. Anyone not have a physical copy so I can bring it next time? You all got one? You have one? Why didn't you say so? Sorry? Why? I don't benefit financially from the book sales. Otherwise, I'd insist on you buying several. All right. Now, yeah, so last time I was saying, when the structure of human cognition is examined, it becomes evident that it is unable to reach the lofty goals that it cannot help but set itself. But set itself, rather, sets for itself. Oh, God, it's getting cold again. For anyone who lives in America, I got this in Target. They have an amazing hat section there.
It's very American.
Sorry?
It's very American.
Is that you, John?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you. You're as American as apple pie, so I take that as a compliment. Yeah, it's from Target, but it's also a tweed American hat. So I hope you weren't offended when I said you're American as apple pie. That wasn't very well thought out.
No, it's
I wasn't
fine.
really intending you in particular.
I'm bleeding red, white, and blue over here, you know.
Okay. Alhamdulillah.
You're not promoting the book, you're promoting the hat.
Sorry?
You're promoting the Target hats, but not promoting the book.
Don't reveal my I'm being sponsored by Target. All right, so all right, this is most fundamentally because, so the structure of human cognition, when we examine the structure of human cognition, it becomes evident that it is unable to reach the lofty goals that it cannot help but set for itself. Maybe I should have said for itself, not sure. Maybe our grammar experts can tell me. Anyway, this is most fundamentally because his examination of reason has shown him that in physics and mathematics, the obtainment of synthetic a priori truths is possible, whereas in traditional metaphysics, this is impossible. So if you read epitomes of Kant, they often say that, I mean, this is often put forward as the real nub of the whole of Kant's philosophy. Yani, I think it's definitely very important. I tend to think, having suffered learning Kant myself, that it's not the easiest way. It's not the kind of, as Sidi Ahmed says, the moment when the penny drops with Kant. The moment for me is when you realize that his whole philosophy is based on the distinction between concepts and intuitions, which, and remember, concepts are the categories of the understanding. It's just another word for them. And they are the categories of the understanding. So concepts are the, correspond to the faculty of the understanding, and then intuitions correspond to the faculty of sensibility. And so that distinction is the most fundamental for Kant, because it's only when there's a fusion of sensibility and understanding that you get experience. Obviously, they have to be unified by the transcendental unity of apperception, but you know, it's the fact that both of these have to be imposed as far as Kant is concerned, which precludes the possibility of us having noumenal knowledge of things in themselves. So in a way, this is, again, Yani, the fact that the synthetic a priori Kant feels has been shown to be impossible in traditional metaphysics, whereas it is possible in physics and mathematics, again, presupposes those really most fundamental things that I just spoke about. And the problem is, when you read epitomes of Kant, sometimes they don't point out those other more fundamental things. So you don't really understand what he's talking about in terms of the synthetic a priori. The other thing is his underlying project, because if you start treating him like a normal philosopher, then you'll make that kind of error, massive error, where you haven't really read the Critique of Purism, but you skip to the end where he seems to be talking about the cosmological argument. And like, what is Kant's famous critique of the cosmological? Kant's critique of the cosmological argument, which you find in that paragraph, is irrelevant. That's not his real critique of the cosmological argument. His real critique of the cosmological argument is his entire philosophy. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So next one, where are we? Oh yeah. So famously for Kant, synthetic a priori truths constitute the only propositions in the sciences genuinely capable of furthering our knowledge. They combine a priori elements that are universal and necessary, while crucially also providing an empirical expansion of our knowledge. Right. So again, for Kant, we never have unfiltered empirical knowledge. Right. So even the appearance of having senses, this is really another place where people trip up. Even the appearance of having senses and having sensation, all that, that's not things in themselves. Right. That's all presupposing all of the other elements of his philosophy. So that's just important to notice. But Kant does recognize that there is something which is a element of uncertainty and what we'll say empirical, empirical, the appearance of empirical expansion of our knowledge beyond merely intuitions and concepts. That's the framework by which we encounter a proliferation of information, and we will never know, because of the way that those apparatus of our cognition have been imposed and have thus obscured whatever on earth it is which is proliferating, whatever that information is that is increasing and is creating this multiplicity. Because we look at the world, we don't see, I mean, I'm looking at a blue, a delightful blue jumper there. I'm not looking at just like the categories of the understanding and time and space. There's something else which they are working on to create this world that we're experiencing. But what that thing is in itself, we will never know, because we're only seeing it insofar as it's distorted, as far as Kant's concerned, by the apparatuses of a cognition. So, yes. So that's what I'm trying to say. Well, I got caught on empirical expansion. La tadhunnanna, that means that there are sensible objects and there's sensation, and that somehow escapes from the whole schema of intuitions and concepts. It's not the case. The empirical expansion, he does believe that there is an empirical expansion of knowledge, because he's like us, looking at the same world where we accumulate new empirical facts. But that's all within the framework of his intuitions and concepts. So a priori concepts and intuitions provide necessity and universality, while observation of the world provides the contingent empirical element rendered intelligible by the a priori forms. Right. So the form of sensibility for Kant is what? Form of sensibility. What were you going to say? Time and space, time and space. Let's take a vote on it. Time and space it is. Yeah, it's time and space. And then there's, what's the matter of sensibility? Ozair? Very nice. Sensation. Exactly. And it's because he can see that sensation has to be, that element that we're talking about, that contingent element of the multiplication of information, that is what makes him affirm that there must be a noumenal world causing sensation, right? We don't know what it is, but something is, there is a nature of things which is causing the affections with an A, the affections in us. Yeah. So, for example, it is the existence of the synthetic a priori which putatively accounts for our ability to predict the occurrence of certain natural phenomena with great accuracy. So here's an example for him of the synthetic a priori. So we're clear what the synthetic means in the analytic. Anyone? Synthetic? What's synthetic? Samil? What's synthetic? Anyone? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so the synthetic is the it goes alongside the analytic. So how would you describe the synthetic? They want to say you?
It's to do with the meaning of the proposition.
That's the analytic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't it?
Looks like we have to go back and to explain the analytics.
The meaning relates to the world would be synthetic.
Yes. So the synthetic is the is with reference to experience. So it's whereas the analytic is just with reference to the meanings of words. The synthetic is where we come to an acquaintance with the truth of a particular proposition by actual acquaintance with the world. So I can't analytically work out what that side of the Sidgwick site looks like. I have to actually go there and have a look. Or I have to be told that would equally be synthetic. So that's the expansion of our knowledge through experience. And so Kant thought, I mean, in line with what was portrayed to the modern philosophers, and I mean the sense of modernity post-Descartes, they portrayed the matter to themselves as if it was a question of, well, we're placing this great emphasis on experience, whereas the dogmatic scholastic theologians were just fiddling about with a priori concepts and thinking that it's getting them somewhere when it's not. And that's obviously not really a very adequate or accurate characterization of the matter. But the point is with Kant is that he doesn't believe that the a priori on its own can get us anywhere. So, I mean, he would look at the moram and he'd just think, well, this is just, I mean, as he characterizes it, it's a grasping amongst concepts. So what's the ontological status of this? Do they exist in themselves? Are they characteristic of the intelligible structure of being? I mean, what are these concepts doing here? I think it's not so much that Kant's right, but I think it is just true that if you can't, it's absolutely true. I mean, putting I think there kind of weakens it. It is absolutely the case, and I think it's incontrovertible. I just said I think again. I think it's just one of those words. It is incontrovertible that if you can't place things in terms of their ontological status, and the ontological status remains indeterminate or unspecified, you literally aren't talking about anything. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about. And so that is problematic. So, but on the other hand, Kant, so this is why he's seen as having been able to chance upon the real middle way between rationalism and empiricism, the dominant philosophies of the time, which of course are historiographical terms. They have to be taken with a pinch of salt. There's past no shows very beautifully, and shows the same about nominalism and realism. But by the way, I mentioned Pascal a lot. I don't by any means think that he is some sort of paragon of virtue when it comes to philosophy, or that he's a kind of exemplary philosopher. Far from it. He's a very good academic, and he just has a really unparalleled knowledge of hitherto undiscovered and not just understudied, but not studied at all, whole areas of medieval philosophy. And if you look at his books like Metaphysical Themes, almost everything he's citing is from manuscripts that no one's published. And imagine that, I mean, in the sense that the study of medieval philosophy in terms of the language of the Academy of Development and Advancement and so on is, I mean, it's true, way ahead of Islamic philosophy, and yet he's going above and beyond into the manuscripts and into the archives to find a wealth of very interesting material, which I think he assembles very convincingly, and so that's why I think I take it very seriously when he questions some of these things that we've previously taken for granted, these classificatory apparatuses in terms of inter-rationalism and empiricism. We think there was a rationalism as if it was a movement, and empiricism as if it was a movement. It's not really the case in nearly as clear-cut a way, and even more so in terms of nominalism and realism, because as he shows, and he's by no means the only person to show, but he's by no means. I mean, many people have smelled a rat about this before him, but he just shows it particularly emphatically, I think, because he's building upon the work of others. But I mean, there's no realism, nominalism debate. It never really happened. And insofar as it did happen, insofar as they do refer to something that seems to answer to this kind of depiction, it isn't about the status of universals. It's about the ontological status of the categories, and everything completely changes when you look at it like that. But again, the whole agonizing over nominalism, realism, and the status of universals is a misconstrual of the mas'ala bi'akmaliha. But anyway, I don't want to go down that route again because we've spoken about that endlessly. Point being here that insofar as Kant is rightly seen, I mean, Pascal's not saying these terms are completely useless for understanding history, just saying they're not very good. But insofar as Kant is rightly understood as having resolved the inner tensions that existed philosophically because of these two antithetical poles of empiricism and rationalism, neither quite making sense on their own, and then no one's worked out a way to put them together and harmonize the true elements of them. It is the case. It is true. It's fairly accurate to say that Kant has that role, is that he harmonized rationalism rather, and empiricism. So his critique of empiricism is actually quite brilliant, and I think there's quite a lot to be said about his critique of rationalism. So very broadly speaking, it's the following: the a priori and a priori concepts are, for him, that's where the rationalist wants to stay. He wants to just lock himself up in his, next to his cozy wood stove, like Descartes did when he was writing the Meditations, and just, armchair speculate his way to the secrets of the universe. And so that's his kind of straw man version of rationalism. But the point is, what his belief is that because these concepts are really in their reality merely imposed upon the object, and they have no real rootedness in the object or real even application to the object, remaining within the realm of the a priori is just grasping, as he calls it very famously, grasping amongst concepts. You're never going to get anywhere. You're never going to find out anything about reality. You may, clarify your concepts nicely. He's not saying that absolutely nothing happens. You might clarify your concepts nicely, but you're never going to find out anything about super sensible reality. And for him, his basic critique of empiricism is, well, it's just a fantasy that you can reduce an intelligible, in the sense of objectively knowable world that we experience to simply sense data. It's just a completely chimerical project because essentially, to put it into his language, of his concepts of the understanding, his categories of the understanding, that there are irreducible elements of our empirical cognition, like the unity, like the relations that obtain between things, like the concept of substance as a substantial single unity, which are irreducible. They're irreducibly metaphysical properties, right? Then they can't be construed in any way as empirical properties. So, so in that way, he thought that he could marry the best bits of rationalism and empiricism through his via his transcendental philosophy, and this is most clearly exemplified in his insistence that the real furtherment of knowledge has to be in terms of synthetic a priori truths, and that these are impossible in metaphysics because there is no experiential dimension in the metaphysics. There's no experiential dimension. So there's nothing to offer the synthetic aspect. And because the core concepts are not really related to any object, they're never going to get you anywhere. They have to be applied in order to get you anywhere to the only objects they can ever really be applied to, ala wa huwa, the empirical object. So that's why synthetic a priori propositions, truths are possible in physics and in the natural sciences more generally. So he says, although we have not yet witnessed a particular solar eclipse, we possess mathematical and further conceptual apparatuses. So, for example, it is the existence of the synthetic a priori which putatively accounts for our ability to predict the occurrence of certain natural phenomena with great accuracy. Although we have not yet witnessed a particular solar eclipse, we possess mathematical and further conceptual apparatuses that enable us to predict the precise time at which this phenomenon will become manifest. And our confidence in the suitability to truth of this fusion of conceptual and empirical elements is only borne out when we do in fact experience the solar eclipse taking place at the exact time predicted via this special employment of our non-empirical conceptual apparatuses. This and other similar examples seem to confirm the real applicability of concepts to sense experience, in which a combination of the a priori, universal and conceptual, and the synthetic, empirical and observable is able to genuinely increase our knowledge of what takes place in the world. Right? For the Kant of the CPR, knowledge can only obtain when two faculties of human cognition, the understanding which yields concepts and sensibility which involves intuitions of time and space, come together to produce experience. Right? Yet concepts and intuitions do. So this is what I was saying is really the prior knowledge that's necessary. Again, if you're reading an epitome of Kant, they just talk about the synthetic a priori, and they don't talk about his whole theory of the imposition of our cognitive apparatuses upon the world that's supposed to be constitutive of the intelligibility of the world, and that's the whole basis of his philosophy. If you don't talk about that, you're not going to get the thing. So the Kant of the CPR has resolved the conundrum concerning their agreement that had so troubled him in 1772. Concepts and intuitions agree because they are both subjective impositions united in the equally subjective transcendental unity of our perception. But this, again, the transcendental unity of our perception is where Kant is grasping towards Platonism. You see, and this is not gone unnoticed. Edward Caird, in his brilliant book on the Greek theologians in about 1902, he noticed this because he was primarily an idealist philosopher, and he wrote a very famous book on the critique of pure reason and on Hegel. That was when British idealism was kind of in its heyday. So Kant thinks everything has to be unified, right, in order to be intelligible, but he also thinks that he was a very astute man. I mean, I have to say, in so many elements of his philosophy, but again, he suffers from this belief that it has to be imposed. In any case, where are we up to? I think we better call it a day. I wanted to have a pretty quick session today. It's because I have to get back and see the scoreline between Argentina and Australia. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi. Jazakumullahu khairan. A general discussion, everyone. Any thoughts?
I can ask something.
Of course.
I still don't understand how he seems to resolve this tension, because he still believes that like there is a direct relationship with the noumena, which must be conditioned by time and space and whatnot. But there still is this direct relationship with the noumena. So how does he? Is he basically saying that that these kind of pre-existing concepts in the mind must somehow always be in concordance with this conditioned reality? I'm not making much sense here, but I still don't.
No, I think it's brilliant. Why don't you start again?
Okay, so Kant is trying to resolve this.
What problem?
The problem that we see these in our experiential or empirical reality. We have these phenomena which we can develop these rational systems to predict and understand. Yet, from a purely rational perspective, it doesn't seem quite clear why that's the case. Because
he doesn't care why. He doesn't think the why would be an answerable question, even in principle. He just wants to make sense of the appearances.
He wants to make sense of the concordance between the two. Is that not the case? The correspondence between
the concordance between concepts and intuitions, you mean? Yeah. Again, I don't think he cares about making sense of the concordance as much as he just is happy to point out that it's there. As we saw earlier in this little book, the motivation for his whole critical project was previously being tortured by this problem of the concordance, which he couldn't make sense of because he thought that the concepts of the understanding, as he construed them at that time, did have access to things in themselves, whereas he was convinced that the effective nature of sensibility meant that it couldn't possibly be related to something which exists in itself. So, and again, he wasn't, I mean, he was absolutely, I mean, that's to get into another issue. It's all there and all the details are there, but he was, he then said in his letter to Hertz that the motivation for his whole critical turn is, how can these concepts agree with one another if we have any semblance, any leftover of a realist understanding of our knowledge acquisition? If we hold on to even the merest semblance of realism, then it simply doesn't, it's impossible to understand how the the concept of the understanding and sensation can agree with one another to produce objective knowledge of the world. Why? Because he considered that it's impossible for the concepts of the understanding to be abstracted from the sensible particular, right? And I think he had very good, and that's also a Platonist position, that it's just empty verbiage and rather it's an empty assertion. It's a mere claim without any evidence. Tahakkum, you might say in Arabic, qawl bila dalil, that the intelligible properties can in any way be rooted in the sensible particular. And the thing is,
the sensible particular doesn't show any sign of the intelligible properties. You're just making that claim. It's not that they're not there. You never find them and be able to point them out, but you simply make that assumption. You say, of course, yes, we abstract the, I love the way so many, people, you've passed through marhalas when you get into philosophy, and a lot of people get into abstraction. Of course, we believe in abstraction, and it is very much this kind of mystical process of somehow abstracting these intelligible properties from the thing. I mean, they show no sign of them whatsoever. And there's no causal structure within our cognition of the empirical particular which would demand that actually they have to, well, actually there is. The empirical particular presupposes and rests upon and absolutely necessitates and entails and really presupposes, rather than entails, this intelligible framework, this intelligible pattern, this intelligible kind of weave of properties, in order to be possible. And that's something that Kant laudably realizes. Yeah, so that was the mystery that he craved to understand, is that, well, if we can't abstract these intelligible properties, which we know are necessary for our cognition of the world from empirical particulars, and yet the sensible empirical world is obviously, as he says, not caused by our minds, which he has, I think that's fair to say on the level that he's saying it, then what on earth is it which makes them agree with each other, which they obviously do? There's nothing in sensible objects that contains the empirical. That's what he's saying. Sorry, that contains the intelligible, and there's nothing in intelligible objects which contains the empirical. So why do they agree with each other? The only conclusion that the only way he could make sense of it is to say they are both imposed by the mind. That's why they agree. And where are they coming together? It's in the transcendental unity of apperception. Again, transcendental in the sense of it's a priori, it's before experience. So, so that unity is what brings them together, the sensible and the thing. So yes, I mean, very soon, this is what we'll find out. I'll very presumptuously say, when we read further on, especially the very imminent next section, 2.1, approaches to the metaphysical problem, Kant's contemporaries, Hegel and some contemporary commentators. So we talk about Haman, talk about Ernst, Plotinus, Schultz and Hegel, and the Wolffians, because they did have a counterattack. What we'll find is the first thing they jumped on is this doctrine of things in themselves. That was like seen as unforgivable by many philosophers, because there was a very active philosophical scene at the time. I mean, we might imagine, and I think we would be very much justified in imagining, based on just a kind of cursory reading of the history of philosophy, that, oh, this was just met by universal acclaim and everyone was, elevating Kant to his rightful position. I mean, you would infer that based on how successful he's been in how influential he's been, but it's not the case at all. There were many. I mean, he had attacks coming at him from every angle, from the Wolffians, from many of the different philosophical schools of his time, and then from many of the, and pretty much all. I mean, the only German idealist philosopher. I mean, that's basically that's the major philosophical movement that he set in motion, although he's not really himself counted as a German idealist, but he's set in motion. The only one who believes in things in themselves is Schopenhauer. All of the other major figures, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, they all reject, and many others, they all rejected that fundamental thing. That's seen as the real defeater and self-defeating Achilles heel of Kant's philosophy. And it's all, I mean, most fundamentally, it's because he's extending the concept of causality, which he says is just one of the concepts of the understanding which has to be imposed by the mind, to things in themselves. So things in themselves are causing the sensations. I mean, it's a huge, it's a very zahir self-contradiction. But he was very, very self-confident, and he felt that it was absolutely necessary. And that criticism was made to him in his own lifetime, as you'll see from his philosophical correspondence, which is a very interesting book with I can't remember the number, but probably over 100 letters, I think. And his final letter is his official condemnation of Fichte, that he doesn't. This is not transcendental philosophy. This is not my philosophy, you know, ana bari' min Fichte. And that's the last one. If you look at the very, very last, but because Fichte had criticized Kant's philosophy while saying, you know, I still consider you to be my master, but he fundamentally criticized very, very important aspects of Kant's philosophy. But it is exactly this idea that, well, the things in themselves, which are in principle unknowable, that means their existence has to be in principle unknowable as well. But he somehow managed to exempt them. And so, yes, there is this very, very fundamental, there are many very fundamental incoherences at the root of his philosophy. But in any case, I don't know if that helps at all.
It does. I mean, to me, it just seems like he's plugging in a hole by just assuming that idea, because he needs to have some connection with that reality out there. But that being said, everything else beyond that just seems kind of arbitrary. You know, it's all you can justify really anything in his sort of, I guess, his thought.
Well, he wanted to avoid charges of Berkeley and idealism. And that's why he brings in refutation of that. He adds a section to his second edition called Refutation of Idealism. So he didn't want, his cognitive apparatus is to just be all there is, because that would open him up to those charges of a Berkeleyan idealism, which he wanted to avoid. He wanted to be considered a realist, but you know, with pretty major provisos that his philosophy involves. And I just think Tashkik al-Wujud is one of those things. I'm not saying it's without merit, but I just think it's one of those things that people proudly parade as somehow very impressive and amazing. And actually, what do you mean being has grades of intensity? It doesn't. I mean, when I think about it now, it just doesn't mean anything to me that being itself has grades of intensity. There are higher, in the hierarchy, there are higher essences. So I carefully avoided using being there, so I didn't say hierarchy of being, I didn't say higher beings. But there are, again, that usage of being in the sense that we agreed upon, which is the i'tibari, and in the Platonic madhab generally it's i'tibari, and amazingly in Suhrawardi it's i'tibari. It's amazing how much Suhrawardi concords with the real Platonic madhab. Allahu alam exactly how that happened. I think he was a really special figure who probably had it a lot by just like proper illumination. But he concord. I mean, even in the critique of the categories, he's the only person, almost, it's not true actually, one of the only people in our tradition who critiqued the categories is Suhrawardi. He had his own list of categories. And again, I don't know where he got that from. You would think, oh, he must have taken that from Plotinus, although Plotinus is by no means the first Platonist to critique categories, but his critique is the most famous. But, you know, Hasan, our best scientific knowledge, Plotinus did not, Plotinus' 6:1-3 was not transmitted to the Muslim world. So, Allahu alam, how that happened. In any case, I'm just saying, I think it's one of those. So yes, we would say being in that broad i'tibari sense, which is just, it's not a real property, right? You understand what I mean by it's not a real property. It doesn't have its own intrinsic nature, which adds something to the essence of a thing. Rather, everything exists, including non-being. Anyway, there's a whole section that I put in my book about that's called a short excursus on unity in being. It's quite a long argument, but the point is the distinction I'm making between, we use the term being, it means something. It's not like we want to exclude it from our philosophical language, and you wouldn't be able to anyway, even if you wanted to. But there's no need to do that. The point is there's no such thing as pure being in itself. What there are essences, there are natures, and everything exists, and it's when you, including non-existent things, and when you try to, it's when you investigate the meaning of pure being in terms of the problem of non-existent yet determinate beings that you find this big problem with it. What do you mean by being? It doesn't even have an intelligible sense if you're talking about it as a real property, as somehow being in itself. That doctrine of Tashkik presupposes the notion that being is a real property, somehow the mysterious being in itself, which, we like. It's nice to think of being in it, like Heidegger, like he's always, being, like somehow the history of philosophy has obscured the real question for being, a real being, not, and then it turns out to be, Dasein or whatever it's called. What is it? Sounds like a vacuum cleaner. What is it? Dasein?
Dyson.
Dyson. No, that's the vacuum cleaner. What is it? It happens to be a word Hegel used as well for being, but it's
CD, do you mean das Sein?
Yeah, Dasein. Are they? Did you hear that?
As two words. It's like the being.
Yeah. Say it again.
Das Sein.
Oh. What?
So you have to distinguish between the two words.
Yeah. Thank you, Sidgwick.
I guess like this idea of, because I know in that chapter you kind of allude to this idea of that example of someone thinking of another man, and this idea that if something has more existence, if we understand it as determinate, as something is more, there's this tashkik, but then understanding in the Akbarian sense that something has more or less existence in the sense that it's more or less determinate, but that's precisely because it's participating more or less.
Well, it's unity then.
So it's unity.
Yeah, that's why I argue also in that thing is that every time you think you're talking about being, you actually turn out to be talking about unity. Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Okay, thank you very much for bearing with me, everyone. I'm for some reason phenomenally zoned out today. I think I may be suffering from still jet lag or something. I don't know. Anyway, thank you. Is there anyone online have a question? No.
I have a question. I'll pose it.
Who's that? Your line's a bit. Whoever's speaking, the line's very distorted.
How people who have an evil soul can. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, your lines. I think there's a lot of delay, and the line's also quite distorted. So, do you want to try again? Maybe it will get better on its own. Oh, Sidney, yes. Do you want to try again? See, I couldn't even make out that was your voice, even though I've known you for 20 years.
How about this?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, it was just this. I need to think about it a bit more. I mean, the possibility of evil people somehow still being able to recognize beauty in things that good people would recognize beauty in. But let me think about it, and then I'll frame the question and I'll write it out for you, inshallah.
Beautiful, Maulana. Inshallah.
That'll do better.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, and I very much look forward to seeing you next time. Inshallah, we'll go on with on beauty. I do plan, once we finish this little book, to go back to the Nafs al-Amr book, and we will go on with on beauty, and then we'll try to follow that course of the that we've been following in terms of the list of treatises that we discussed, inshallah ta'ala. Hayyakum Allah. Please keep us in your prayers. Thank you very much, and take care. Assalamu alaikum.